Well, as I already mentioned, our theme for this Advent is On the Way to Bethlehem. We're going to be exploring the physical locations, the cities, the places that are important to the Christmas story that we've all become so familiar with. And so we'll look at the manger, we'll explore Bethlehem and Nazareth, we'll think about the city of Jerusalem. We'll even think after Christmas about the region then known as Persia. We call it modern-day Iraq. But today, we begin in the most unlikely of places, a place that we don't think about when we think about the Christmas story, but it's a place that was kind of like the air that our Holy Family, like depicted in this window here, it was the air that they breathed. And that city was called what? Rome. So as we think about the Christmas story, it's really important for us to have any depth of understanding to the story that we place it in the context of the Holy Roman Empire. Dum, 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 dum. If you know your history, you know that General Pompey conquered Jerusalem in AD 63. And then the citizens, the Jews of Jerusalem, were subjects of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I want to make sure you recognize that they were subjects, but not citizens. Right? This was taxation without representation. We know a little something about that in our country, don't we? They did not have the rights or the privileges of a citizen, and yet they were subject to all the laws, all the decrees, and yes, all the taxations that came out of Rome. And so Luke, in this most famous Christmas story that we began reading with those 3 verses out of Luke chapter 2, Luke begins the Christmas story not in the manger, not in Nazareth or Bethlehem, not in Jerusalem. He begins in Rome. A decree went out from who? Caesar Augustus. And what was that decree? That the whole of the Holy Roman Empire should be registered, or the King James Version says, taxed. And so this census that Caesar Augustus ordered, why do you think Caesar ordered this census? It's all about the money, 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 right? It's all about the taxing. And how many of you love paying taxes? Okay. Hands nowhere in the room, right? It's not one of our favorite activities is paying taxes. There's a story I heard recently about an IRS auditor who was walking down the street, and a guy comes up to him and says, "Give me all your money." And the IRS auditor scolded him and said, "Hey, you can't do that." And so the guy said, "Okay, then give me all my money." Most of us don't love paying taxes, yet it's something that we must do. Some people cheat on their taxes. Have you heard that happens? People cheat on their taxes, and I think it's heinous. I think it's terrible. I think it's not a world in which I want my 31 dependents growing up in. All right. Enough with the tax jokes. But I want you to think about Mary and Joseph. Mary, great with child. Mary, 9 months pregnant. Mary and Joseph walking 100 miles to Bethlehem. Not because it was a fun vacation, but why? What was his name? Caesar Augustus made them. Do you think they were thrilled about this trip? Probably not. I think it's safe to say that they might have been irritated, even angry. We don't know about their emotional state. But what good Jew in his or her right mind would want to make a 100-mile journey with a 9-month pregnant woman because Caesar made them report for duty, take the census, and be counted so they could pay their taxes? Rome. It was the air they breathed. Decisions, decrees, mandates coming out of Rome affected their lives in ways large, like walking 100 miles with a 9-month pregnant woman, And it also affected their lives in small ways, like the paying of taxes, like the ubiquitous Roman soldiers they would have seen in the public square. Rome. It's where the Christmas story begins. Now, let me ask you, how many of you have been to Rome? All right, Vatican City. All right, probably if you've been to Rome, you've been to the Vatican. You remember seeing St. Peter's Square or St. Peter's Basilica. Maybe you marveled at Michelangelo's Pieta. Maybe in Rome, outside the Vatican, you enjoyed seeing the Colosseum ruins. Maybe you sat on the Spanish Steps. For me, I want to tell you first about the second most memorable spot for me when I visited Rome, the only time I've been to Rome, over 20 years ago now. The second most memorable spot for me in Rome was the inside of a subway train car. See, I thought I was a fairly savvy traveler. I had my bag around my shoulder, it was kind of right here on my hip, and I kept my hand clutched over my bag, and then 72 million people entered the subway train car, and they're pushing you around, and you got to grab onto something, and in a split second, with my hand on the pole, someone pickpocketed me. Took all of my money, took all my credit cards. And so I spent the rest of the day making international phone calls, trying to cancel my credit cards, trying to figure out how to fund the rest of my trip without my cash or my credit cards. It was not a pleasant experience. It's my second most memorable spot was the inside of that subway train car. I think about Mary and Joseph. If their feeling about Rome is kind of like my feeling about Rome, that Rome robbed me blind, you think Mary and Joseph might have felt that way about Rome? Now, I want us to think about our lives in context of the Mary and Joseph story and their relationship with Rome. You see, we too, maybe we don't think about it a lot, but we also live within systems that don't always have our best interest at heart. Do you believe that's true? Decisions that are coming down from places like DC or Tallahassee, even City Hall, even the HOA, right, that have an effect on our lives. We live within systems that don't always have our personal, individual best interest at heart. So one of the questions I want to ask today is this: how do we thrive? Not just survive, how do we thrive within systems that don't always have our best interest at heart? And how do we live with some agency when we can't always affect the decisions coming from on high and all these different places? I've got a couple of ideas here. One is to simply name it like we're doing this morning. I don't think Mary and Joseph were naive about the power that was wielded over them from Rome and Caesar. Now, it's hard to resist what we can't or don't name, right? Political entities and systems that try to divide us at every turn, economic systems that have the very wealthiest people's interest in minds, religious systems that place dogma over people. And if we're not willing to acknowledge that, if we're not willing to name it, if we're not willing to say, this is not the kingdom of God, it's going to be really hard for us to push back against those systems. Naming it is the first step for us to not internalize the logic coming out of those systems that can oppress. It helps us not to believe in the lies that the system wants us to believe. So naming it is a first step that we can claim some agency. And the second step, is to find our people. You see, systems that want to oppress, they want to keep us divided. They want to keep us isolated. Mary didn't go to Bethlehem on her own. She had Joseph. The early Christians didn't do life on their own. They formed these small, tight-knit communities so that they could withstand the pressures coming out of Rome. We're probably today not going to overthrow any systems. I don't know. I mean, maybe you will. I don't know. But what can we do? Well, we can make sure that none of our neighbors go hungry. We can collect 55 turkeys and $925 in untold pounds of food to give to a food bank to make sure our friends and neighbors here in the community don't go hungry. We can collect toys for the children at a battered women's home and little gift bags to make sure those women feel remembered and special at Christmas. We can do things like that in our community. And in those ways, we are pushing back against systems that oppress folks. We can stand with the marginalized in so many ways. All right, back to Rome. Now, I've told you about the second most memorable place for me in my only visit to Rome. Do you want to hear about the first? So it was the day after I was pickpocketed. I had one more day in Rome. And I decided I was going to try to make the most of it, right? I'd had a miserable day the day before, but I had one more day in Rome, so I was going to see some more sights. So I went to the old city and walked around the ruins of the Forum. And I'm by myself. I got a backpack on. And as I'm walking by the ruins of the Forum, which is the first most memorable place from my visit to Rome, a band of gypsies, you're not going to think I'm telling the truth, I swear to God. A band of gypsies attacked me. It's true. It was 2 women and 750,000 children. And these women and these children, as I'm walking beside the Roman Forum, they surround me and they start kind of going around me and pushing me and pulling me. And one of the women takes off with my backpack. Now, I don't have a dime to my name. She's not going to get any money. But guess what she got? My passport. You want to know what I did? I ran after that woman. I grabbed my backpack. I jerked it out of her hand, made sure my passport was there, and I took off running the other way. Thank you. Very, very proud of that moment. I'm not proud of how unsavvy of a traveler I was, but I'm proud that I got my passport back. Why do I tell you this story about my victory over the gypsy women and their 7 million children that surrounded me? It's because I want to ask the question of us today. How do we claim victory when there are empires, when there are systems, even circumstances that are simply out of our control? All of us have been in situations where there's been something out of our control. Here's the first thing. We claim our power. With those gypsies, I knew I had 2 good legs and a fighting spirit. I claimed my power. I got my passport back. Mary and Joseph, they were subject to these decrees out of Rome. The empire wanted to reduce them to like a number in a census. Mary, you're number 47 out of Nazareth. But I want you to hear how Mary resisted. We didn't read this. This is from what is now often called the Magnificat from Luke chapter 1. This is Mary's song, 2 lines out of that. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. The Magnificat is Mary's song of resistance. She claimed her power when she sang that song. She claimed her power by declaring that God saw her, that God knew her, and that God chose her for some sacred task. We too can claim our power when we refuse to let any system, political or economic or even religious, when we refuse to let any system tell us that we are less than the beloved children of God. Paul in the book of Romans that we read together put it this way, that we are heirs of God and joint heirs with Christ. This is our identity. We are children of God, not just some number on a census. We are more than our credit score or our productivity or our usefulness to empire. We claim our power. Number 2, we practice hope as resistance. Paul, in the section that we read from Romans 8, he said that we are saved in hope. Saved in hope. What does he mean by this? Hope it's not just optimism. It's not just sticking our head in the sand and pretending everything's fine, there's no problem here. Hope is the stubborn, defiant belief that this is not all there is. That creation is groaning for something more, to give birth to something new in our world, and creation groans and makes that manifest through us. Mary and Joseph walked to Bethlehem in an oppressive system, but they carried hope with them, didn't they? We claim our power when we refuse to give in to despair, when we rebuild after a hurricane, when we string up lights when it turns dark at 2:30 in the afternoon. There are so many ways we claim hope. It's not a passive waiting, it's an active participation that light will shine in the darkness. Why? Because we're going to make it. Number 3. We live as if God's kingdom is already here. The most radical thing Mary did was not give birth to Jesus. It was to live as if God's promises had already been fulfilled, as if what God said and promised had already come true, despite the decrees from Rome, despite Herod and all of his manipulations and violence, despite the powerful that still sat on their thrones. Mary refused to give up hope. We claim our power when we live according to the values of God's kingdom. Generosity, when the world tells us there's scarcity. Mercy in a world that wants to seek punishment. Belovedness in systems of shame. We don't wait for permission or the system to change. We start living the resurrection life now. And so, if you don't hear anything else from me today, hear this. You are not powerless. We are not powerless. Yes, there are systems, there are forces, political, economic, cultural. They want to diminish us. They want to profit from us. But we carry something that they can't take. We carry the very image of God. We carry hope that refuses to die. We carry a stubborn, sacred belief that another world is possible. Mary, she walked to Bethlehem, a subject of the Holy Roman Empire. She left as the mother of God. So friends, name the systems, find your people, refuse to let the system define your worth, practice hope as resistance, and live as if the kingdom had already come. Because it is. The kingdom has already come, and it's right here, and it's right now, and it's in you, and the empire still stands, but guess what? You do too. And that, my friends, is how the revolution begins.